I'm the last presentation, so we are coming towards the end of the discussion of the report. I'm not going to try to summarize the report. It's on the table there, and you can take a copy, and you can read it, and I hope you will, and feedback will be welcome. Foresight is driven by science, and I think when we look at the challenges related to older people, we need to take on board the fact that science is beginning to give us some really rather important insights into the aging process. And most importantly, I think we grow up forming preconceptions about what aging is all about, and science is telling us that probably 90% of what we think we know about aging is just plain wrong. So it's really important that we harness the insights that come from science when we look at some of the challenges that are presented by the really rapidly growing numbers of older people within our society. We tend, I think, rather negatively to think in terms of the burden of all these older people, but that's because we make the mistake of assuming that sort of age equals senility, age equals losing your marbles. And it simply isn't like that. And we have convincing evidence of this in a study that we're doing in Newcastle, the Newcastle 85 Plus study, in which we're approaching everyone in the city, or have approached everyone in the city born in 1921, and find that really a very large fraction of these people are cognitively intact and leading very full and busy lives, some of them so busy you have to book an appointment 2 or 3 months ahead of time to be able to get to see them, or you discover they're just about to go out partying. What we need to recognize, and this is on the slides here, is that there is incredible underutilization of the mental capital that we carry with us into old age. And some of that comes from things that are sort of within the structure of our retirement policies. They relate to issues of work. They relate to other issues that have been discussed here. And all of this feeds into an environment in which there are real challenges to the mental well-being of older people. And the mental well-being of older people is affected, for example, by a sense of self-worth, and so attitudes that can inform that, both received from society, but also the attitudes that people carry with them into old age. If you were ageist when you were young, that doesn't mean you stop being ageist when you become old. When you become old, it becomes much worse of a problem because the negative attitudes you have towards yourself and the expectation of what you can do with your mental capital may be reduced. So what we need to do is to turn all of this around so that we can actually maximize the contribution that older people can make within society, both for themselves and for society as a whole. There's tremendous scope for increased productivity. But the other side of the coin is to minimize the dependency that comes from a feeling of low self-worth, which increases vulnerability to depression and can all too easily precipitate an older individual on a downward spiral where a loss of self-worth leads to depression. Depression leads to not taking exercise, not feeding yourself well, to withdrawing from society. That in turn leads to musculoskeletal decline. It can lead to cognitive impairment, which makes you feel even worse about yourself, and you go downhill much, much more rapidly than you need to. What I think we're beginning to see, and this is evidenced in the reports, is that it's possible to reverse this downward spiral and to, in many cases, create a positive, a virtuous cycle of reinforcement. But it requires policy changes to be made. It requires us to recognize that science tells us that this outcome is possible. And all of this has to be informed by economics. We need to recognize that investments in some of the early stages that will make this possible will deliver significant returns, either in terms of increased productivity or in terms of reduced high-cost dependency. So what are we going to do about it? How can we address these huge challenges? Well, we can promote social networking, we can enable ongoing learning, and we can enable working for older people. And we've heard in the other presentations earlier a lot about how this might be done. We can also take a fairly sort of firm look at the societies in which we expect people to grow old now. We can look at the built environment, we can look at the transport infrastructure, we can look at just simply the way that we sort of engineer our world, which is, for the most part, not terribly favorable towards older people who may be becoming a bit more frail. Work I'm not going to discuss because that's been presented already. Technology provides huge opportunities. We have amazing technologies to overcome limitations in other areas of life. I have a simple piece of technology on the bridge of my nose that means that I can work in a way that would simply not be possible if I didn't have spectacles. But technology can liberate older people, it can remove dependency, it can allow re-engagement in society and in work. Probably, though, the most important thing that we have to do is to use science to inform a real strategy to challenge the stigma that's associated with being old in today's world. We need also to recognize the huge diversity. The people in this room, all of us, we belong to a privileged subset of society, and I suspect that we will have relatively few problems in navigating our path into old age with retirement. We will probably find productive things to do. But there are a very large number of people in our society who lack the basic mental capital resources to allow them to achieve these happy outcomes. And we need to address what may be necessary, perhaps in terms of sort of later life education, remedial education to overcome this. At the end of the day, when we look at the issue presented by older people, we should remember that at the moment we live in a time when life expectancy within the UK is still increasing. We don't know when this increase is going to stop, but the reality is that life expectancy is still increasing at the rate of 2 years for every decade that passes. What that means is that today, life expectancy in the UK will increase by 5 or more hours. And so when we look at the challenges for older people in terms of mental capital and well-being, let's think about it in those terms. 5 hours a day, we're stacking them up for the future. What are they going to be like when we come to use them?